This is Reah, and this is Just the Who of Us, where we talk about a range of topics, including life events, current events, spirituality, entertainment, family relationships, as well as answering listener questions and more.
Welcome back to Chapter 3 of Dirt on My Cloth. So, if you've been here so far, you've listened to me read Chapter 1, Daddy Issues, and Chapter 2, Mommy Issues. And just a little kind of recap. Daddy Issues was about my relationships, not only with my father, but with other fathers in my life, my children's fathers. And Chapter 2 was about my relationship with myself as a mother. And I also talked some about my mom too, but the chapter wasn't like mommy bashing. Daddy Issues wasn't daddy bashing. It's more about my interactions with my father and the fathers of my kids. And then chapter 2 about my relationship with myself as a mother. So here we are at chapter 3, Disruptive Behaviors. During a visit requested by my father, he asked me to take him to the gas station, and of course I did. When we went in, I purchased an item and he told me he would be out after me. When he came back to the car, he told me to go and started pulling out the beers and snacks and the air fresheners he had stolen. At that moment, I had to face the reality that my own father just used me to drive an hour and a half to steal air fresheners and beer from a gas station 2 minutes from his house. This is similar to a time later on when he would pretend to want to visit my children and myself, but was really only there to steal half a bottle of ibuprofen meant for my Nana. At that time, he had stopped drinking alcohol and replaced that addiction with OTC pain meds at the minimum weed. I guess this was a reason for my misunderstanding on how people can afford to buy certain lifestyles but not pay child support. Yes, I know I'm not here to judge, but since I know he easily could have supported his children instead of destroying them emotionally, I have the right to be judgy and biased. Okay, look, disruptive behaviors is not about the bad things my father did. I promise you it changes. But it kind of just paints a little bit of a picture to kind of who I was and into kind of the behaviors that I displayed in my own life from influences. These types of behaviors made me feel that he had abused my trust. This revelation was even more hurtful since it made me realize that while I knew my dad was an addict who had a horribly abusive and unhealthy relationship with his other daughter, I realized he actually didn't value his relationship with me any more than hers. In reality, he cared just a little about me. I just hadn't been around much to see it. I physically kept a different distance between him and I because it was the best way to preserve the loving memories of our prior relationship we had in my head, where he adored me when I was still his little girl who he respected and adored. This kind of paints, I mean, again, it just kind of paints a little bit of a picture into the things that you'll find out about me in my autobiography, some of my habits and things like that. And in Daddy Issues, I talk a little bit about my relationship with my father, how it was when I was a kid, and how it had changed over the years. And this is kind of like sprinkling a little bit of that in to reflect on my decision making. He told me he told me that even as an adult, on the occasion that I did go visit, he told me he was proud of me and that he loved me. It wasn't until I lived there that I realized those were only things he felt when I just dropped by because they felt nice to say. Half of the time he called my half sister and me each other's names. So in hindsight, maybe he didn't know who was on the other end of the receiver when we talked on the phone. Or maybe he did mean it. Maybe he did mean those things because I stayed away and didn't give him someone to yell at, be disappointed in, all the things I saw him do to the daughter I thought was his favorite. My father, after writing this book, my father passed away due to health complications. He had a very he struggled with his mental health his whole life, right? And it was just crazy to me writing this because the vision and memories I had of my father as a child were so different. And the more time I spent away as I got older, the more it became apparent that like that was just a memory. That was childhood memories, and that wasn't that man, that healthy, vibrant man was kind of long gone because addiction and mental health had and unhealthy mental health had taken over. Maybe he said those things because I stayed away and didn't. Blah, blah. I realized that my father was so gone that he probably didn't even know what he felt about who at that point, but rather it was about who was most convenient for him. I can't even really be mad at him, and I know I should. I hate the addict that replaced my dad and created the father who has taken his place. My father was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, addictive personality disorder, heart issues, organ failures, and things broken and replaced. What stands out to me is the physical torture he put his body through with all the things he put into it. I would run down to South Carolina for years every time something happened. Those constant calls about his health continued for a lot of years and reconnected me with that side of the family at one point. Ironically, those same visits would be what re-severed the ties to them by the time I went back home. I've studied psychology and mental health to learn and help people like him. I studied to help people who are young and don't have control over the torture placed on their bodies, people who do not control the trauma and stress they live through and make a conscious decision to turn into a positive experience, growth, or lifestyle for themselves. During the short period of time I lived in my Nana's home, both during providing care as her living CNA and before moving out after her passing, I discovered a lot about myself and grew. During my stay, I decided to obtain a degree in medical assisting since I had obtained my CNA and had experience as an in-home caregiver. I wanted to launch my career to higher levels when I left South Carolina. As stated, I moved to South Carolina for a few months and became my Nana's living caregiver because her previous caregiver was fired for stealing medication, among other things. But the way things were going between the different treatment of my children and my relationship with my family members due to cultural and personal differences, I knew that once my Nana passed, I would have no reason to stay around and needed a career to better provide for my children because of the way my children were treated due to differences. As much as my mother loves me, she loves me better when I'm not living in her house. Barely able to contribute, letting my kids run around and wreak havoc, spending my time working or not working, partying and complaining about everything that didn't go the way I wanted it. Don't get me wrong, I would never paint my mother as the bad guy because as much as I would never have admitted it some years ago, she was the number one support in my life since I was born. I don't know much about my grandparents' history in terms of addictions, but I have no memory of them showing any signs of addiction. The only addiction I'm aware of was that my grandfather was addicted to hating non-white people and was involved in KKK. As far as I'm aware, my father's sisters were all healthy and clean throughout my life, as were their husbands. I guess the train just randomly stopped at my father and continued chugging on to my half sister and me. It probably wouldn't have picked up a kid, probably would have picked up a kid or two of mine had I not thrown it off the tracks and refused to fuel it. That didn't happen until some years later, though. I remember my half sister and myself being disgusted at our parents for smoking when we were kids, but as soon as we hit our teenage years, we picked up the habit too. We also picked up the addictive personality and questionable parenting choices. One of the cycles I chose to break was going back and forth with my father, half sister, and stepmother over the years. Things were never what I expected when I was there visiting. My children were always treated like outsiders, and my request to not have smoke around them was never respected. It is difficult to be comfortable around people when you can clearly see that they see your children as different from the rest of your family. I chose to break the cycle of prejudice, racism, and racial profiling. I chose to involve myself with the exact people of my father's family some people my father's family would hate. It is funny looking back because I didn't choose the people I surrounded myself with in spite of anyone, but I'm so glad I chose the people I chose in my life later on. If there was ever a better way to give a giant middle finger to the type of people who deserved it most, it's by being a ghetto tattooed, pierced covered, interracial having, Black Lives Matter supporting, mother of mixed kids, gay pride, youth leading, God believing, but not strictly religious and lets her kids choose their own preference in following religion, bisexual white woman. You're welcome. So to kind of, I was angry at this point when I wrote this book, and I didn't have a good relationship with a lot of people in a portion of my family just because I felt like they were very prejudiced against everything that I said. You know, some people are just kind of, if you're not like me, I don't like you or I don't understand you. And I felt at the time that that's how a lot of people around me were. And so, but again, like I've said in previous chapters, reading previous chapters, those people have profoundly changed over the years. This book was written about 10 years ago, so a lot has changed since then. To get back on topic, in July of 2012, while I was living in South Carolina, I got my second DUI conviction while I was back home visiting North Carolina. I went down for the weekend, and after riding to and from a bar with a friend, I decided to drive back to my mother's house. I went through a DUI checkpoint, and bam, second DUI. I hid the DUI from my father's family, and upon them doing some digging and finding out on their own, I was praised by my father for it. It was not until this happened that I began to observe others' behavioral consequences and question my own. I started making decisions to change my lifestyle in relation to partying and abusing alcohol. Once I was convicted of the DUI, I moved back to North Carolina and started working at Walmart. Another addiction, dead end jobs. I decided to do something smart and started school online as a medical assistant in 2013. While working at Walmart and going to school, I met some amazing people. Actually, that's not right. Oh, yeah, it was 2013. Well, anyway, I also suffered the loss of an amazing friend, Tyshawn, which only added to the growing list of people who should still be here with us, but are not due to no fault of their own. Being his friend was one of the best parts of my experience during that time. In 2014, my then boyfriend, my children, and I moved into a house together, and life was great. That is, life was great until we began to physically fight and have arguments when the kids were home. This made me realize it was time for him to go. While he had, well, we had been friends for many, many years, like since high school. I was not about to repeat the toxic behaviors I had worked so hard to shake. I wasn't about to have a man in my house that I was fighting with. Absolutely not. Um, Mind you, this is after my divorce and everything. Not doing it again. Um, Eventually, I reconnected with another longtime friend, and together we decided it was time for my ex to move out since he was still living in the house months after we had broken up. So he was still there, not paying bills, blah, blah, blah. And it's crazy because, like, that's not me. Like, I don't just go, like, hopping around living with people. That's not. But I'm going to be very honest in this instance that I did kind of, we kind of used each other because he had just moved back in the state. I had just moved back in the state. We were friends for since high school at least, and it just was kind of convenient. It was stupid because it was just convenient and it didn't work out. And now I feel like having kids, that shouldn't have taken place because I should have had my shit together and had a place to provide them. But I didn't realize that then. I was still very young and very stupid. Um, my mom and my now fiance, who is now my husband's fiance at the time of writing this book, sat with me until he left. After that, I stayed focused on my education, being an amazing mother, and working to be a better wife the second time around, and a better daughter to my mom. I think this was pretty much the point where I really ended the toxic behaviors and patterns and just stopped deciding to be such a fuck up. Really, at some point, it is time to grow up. I quit smoking, changed jobs, moved, and sought out to continue my college education. I got engaged in May of 2017, and our relationship is still thriving because I've been married for almost 2 years. While it hasn't been easy by any means, the choices I have made have definitely been for the better. I can say with complete confidence that my children will grow up to be much better people because I decided to break the cycle of dysfunction. I chose to break that cycle for my children. I chose to break the cycle for my ex-husband. I chose to break the cycle for my mother. I chose to break the cycle for my little cousins. I chose to break the cycle for my potential future child or children. I chose to break the cycle for my friends. I chose to break the cycle for my family. I also chose to break the cycle for my nieces and nephews to also give them an additional positive role model in their lives. Although I'll probably never, at this point, I wasn't on good terms with a lot of my family, one side of my family. And so in the book, I write, although I will never know, although I'll never, although I will probably never see them again, they may see me. Although my father's family may never really know who I am, I chose to break the cycle for them too. Although I will never know personally the young girls and women who read this book, I chose to break the cycle for them. And I chose to break cycles for you because now I can share my story with you and hopefully positively impact and influence you who's listening. We don't always see the results of our decisions, but they're there and definitely have meaningful, lasting, and sometimes unexpected effects. In November of 2017, I wrote my first sermon called Being a Doer. This was while I was in school for Christian Studies, which I coincidentally enrolled in a week after being fired from Walmart after numerous changes in management and impossible work demands. Writing the sermon was one of the first times I recorded my story. I realized then that I'm not one to follow a script, but I'd already had my suspicions of that based on the way I lived my life. Things come more naturally when I just say them, when I just simply talk about how I feel and what I think, and what I've experienced and what I've learned. I think what I think it is one thing that helped me to write a book. I can only hope that it's the first of many. And I was right. I was used to writing essays and academic papers, things that came with an outline. Writing the sermon, that was a wonderful experience because it was the first thing that I wrote that was for me, for my classmates, for my professor, and anyone who ever chose to read it. It could actually help someone, and even if I decide not to ever use it, I still knew that I could do it. It made me feel at peace, aligned with purpose, and connected to God in a way that had meaning and reason, a way that was expressive and showed growth. I started to write about other things and find other addictions and hangups to overcome and replace with positive habits. Now my addictions are education and making a difference. In November of 2018, I graduated with a degree in Christian Studies. About a year later, in September of 2019, I graduated with a master's level certificate in life coaching. And another year later, in August 2020, I graduated with a master's degree in psychology. In 2021, I will have a master's degree in mental health and wellness counseling with an emphasis on family dynamics. Replacing harmful addictions with healthy habits was not easy. And honestly, I still struggle with food. I still struggle with spending money on lattes, decaf lattes. They're not even real lattes. They're decaf lattes. $6. It's stupid. But anyway, I also have an addiction to yelling at people who drive very horribly. I'll admit, it's stupid, but it's something I still struggle with. um, I had to remove myself from people and situations. I had to remove myself from people and situations that were not healthy for me. It took hard work and tough decision making. It's I had to experience the rough times so to realize that I always made it through them. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm way beyond where I was and what I could have hoped for. And I know that it is only when we stop seeing the ways we can improve ourselves that we stop growing as people. Surprisingly, there have only been a few times when I have been aware that I am being assessed and taken in by another person. I've watched their eyes connect with me. I've watched their eyes connect with each and every visible tattoo and have seen them drag the same gaze back up to meet the eyes. When I was younger, I witnessed a few stares and rudeness toward my biracial children. My husband used to get crazy looks while being out in public along with our very obviously white child as well. There were also a few racial remarks made by my father's family and the rude look toward my child by a stranger who my mama had quickly put into their place. Honestly, those examples are nothing compared to the disruptive behaviors I displayed over the years. So a lot of this is about disruptive behaviors that affected me, but a lot is also going to be about disruptive behaviors that I've had and how I've come through them. Um, Despite those experiences, and due to my experiences with even white people judging me, I do not and have not judged people based on their ethnicity. It hasn't even happened though, haven't it hasn't even happened enough to take up my brain space. The behaviors I witnessed from others aren't as shameful to me as learning behaviors I exhibited before I was old enough to realize how ignorant and unfounded they were. I think that it's a responsibility as humans to educate ourselves and others and understand people's differences so we are not ignorant and hurtful towards them. This one's a little difficult, but I'm going to read it anyway because you know what happened. And if you know me, you know these things anyway, and you know who I am now. When I was about 20 years old, I worked as a waitress in a restaurant. I don't think I'd encountered a gay man or woman to have properly considered my beliefs or views on any lifestyle besides a heterosexual relationship. I wasn't raised. I grew up in Charlotte, okay? So, like, I grew up in a big city, and somehow I wasn't raised around um, a lot of openly gay people, probably partially because of my family's religious beliefs and because, well, this was the 90s, 2000s. I was raised in the 80s, and this is leading up to, so between 1985 and 2005, I hadn't really been around any gay people, openly gay, bisexual, trans, anything. And my family's religious beliefs contradicted believing that that was acceptable. So, just to paint a little picture, um, when I started working at the restaurant, I don't know, I had nothing to base my beliefs on besides church mostly. When I started working at the restaurant, I became very close friends with a gay man and a bisexual woman who at the time identified as a lesbian, but our friendships came at different times. At the time, I was naive and had been raised by parents with closed-minded beliefs about sexual orientation, but not about race, as I had two mixed children by that point. My mother wasn't prejudiced um, against who I dated. She actually dated outside her race, so it's like not a thing. Before I became friends with these two people, two female customers walked into a restaurant. I approached them and noticed they were very affectionate with one another. I decided to give that table to someone else because their intimacy made me feel uncomfortable. Boo-hoo. The woman I asked to take the table called me out as soon as I asked her to take it. She told me she was a lesbian and asked if I had a problem with her as well. I was shocked. not because she identified as a lesbian, but because I realized that I was being homophobic and offensive. I did not realize that I was being offensive because my behavior was an automatic response. These two women that I would later come to realize, actually, the two women that I would later come to realize I tried to avoid serving had actually coincidentally played a part in one of my friend's murders. Not related, I didn't know that at the time, but come to find out, maybe I was just following my instincts. Maybe it wasn't even about their affection. Maybe I just knew something was off, but I don't know. While it would be easy for me to attribute my reaction to a gut feeling about them as people, in reality, I was simply ignorant about their lifestyle, and my reaction was based on prejudice. Oh my gosh, my reaction was based on prejudice regarding their sexuality. I would fight anyone who had something negative to say about my children who were conceived with a black man, but at the same time, I was not comfortable serving two lesbians. Insert eye roll at younger self, because I was fucking stupid. To make a long story short, I became super close to the gay man I worked with, and the lesbian I worked with later became the first woman I was intimate with, and the one who made me realize that I was bisexual myself. Take that, younger, apparently homophobic self. Fast forward to today, I'm an avid supporter of the LGBTQ plus community. I teach my children about gender fluidity. I attend walks as a family supporting said community, and I verbally support the community whenever I'm afforded the community. What? Whenever I'm afforded the opportunity. Regardless of my appreciation for women and everyone's personal choice to be and act however they want, I am married to a man. I know. I'm sorry, but he's in catch, and I couldn't pass it up just because he has a penis. How someone chooses to identify hurts no one. You have to get to know your child, relative, or friend as a person different from who you thought they were. People grow up, people change, people's likes and interests and things change. And they don't have to be everything you want them to be. They're their own people. We are our own people. Times change, and it's okay. You aren't really worried about how society will view them. Your concern is how you view them, but you don't want to hurt their feelings by telling them. Practically speaking, com, practically speaking, straight men commonly harm women, children, and men more than transgender people do. People you may not understand simply just want to live their life just like straight people do. If you follow me on social media, you know this. I still talk about the same kind of stuff. It's not going to change. So if you don't like it, um, you probably shouldn't read the rest of this book or follow me on social media, and I'm okay with that. What I've learned about people who identify as LGBTQ plus is that love, companionship, and trust is valued over and above most physical sex, and that I can say that with confidence from the conversations that I've had and my own experiences. Prejudice is usually born in a place of ignorance. At least for myself, I had no experience with anyone except for straight or closeted men and women. I had experiences with Black men and women, but no other races, cultures, or nationalities. That's not really true. There was a kind of a mix of nationalities at my high school. So, other than teenagers, I guess I would say. I definitely did not understand someone who had a non-conformed sexual experience, at least not to my knowledge, because this was the early 2000s and things were more obscured from the view at that time. Another thing about that period is that it really was different. I grew up in a big city, but my children occasionally got dirty looks from older white women, and the only apparent crime was being half Black while walking with their white mother. It doesn't seem like it's that long ago. It, as much as it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. Like in the grand scale, some people may like look and listen or whatever and be like, oh my gosh, that was so long ago. Blah, blah, blah. The racism, blah, blah, blah. Slavery was so long ago. No, it's not that long ago. It's really not. Like, really, if you pay attention, it's and one of the reasons I talk about it is because my children who are 24 to 15 have experienced it, and they're only 24 to 15. No, it wasn't that long ago. It still happens. Educate yourselves. So, being uh, that was something I experienced since I had my first mixed child at 14. While I was fully aware of the prejudice experienced by interracial couples, primarily through my own experiences, and despite being part of the community myself, I was ignorant about the experiences of anyone who wasn't straight. I was also ignorant of the struggles experienced by those who came to America without knowing how to speak English. My parents believed that anyone who lived in America should learn English, speak English. But anywho, I took it upon myself to learn Spanish, at least, and introduce my children to learning Spanish. But that's neither here. That's another thing that I did once I grew and evolved a little bit and out of this prejudiced, simple-minded person. Um, while I was fully aware of the experience, I was ignorant about the experience of anyone who wasn't straight. I was also ignorant of the struggles experienced by those who came to America without knowing how to speak English. My parents believed that anyone who lived in America should learn English, and questions, why do I have to press one for English in America? They were not just prejudiced people. They were just ignorant. They were not prejudiced. They were ignorant to other cultures because they were ignorant to other cultures being equally and rightfully in America. America was referred to as a melting pot at one time, at least. So much for the land of opportunity. It makes perfect sense that other languages would be spoken here because it is America. It's supposed to be for home, home for everybody, home, the melting pot. Um, uh, Having been raised the way I was, these were the views I had as well until I became better educated and surrounded myself with people who looked different than myself. I realized that no one needed to speak English just so I could understand if they were talking to someone else and not me. Why do they need to speak English so I can be nosy? Also, why do they not have the right to speak their own language as an option just like I do? Being prejudiced can keep you from so many things in life. It can keep you from learning a second language so you can communicate with more people. It can keep you from learning about other cultures so you can be open to others and the way they are open to people born and raised in America. Why not treat all God's people the same? We know absolutely nothing about a person except that we can't understand their language, so we think they're at fault. It really is about equality and acceptance. Taking the time to understand others is necessary to grow as a person. As a mother, it is a necessity to teach your kids to treat others with kindness and respect, even if they're different from you, especially those whose stories we don't know. Prejudice keeps you from really getting to know people. These are the only two instances I can think of that I've experienced personally, but these two are regretful enough. The point of this chapter is to be informative on both prejudices. The purpose of this chapter is to be informed on both prejudices and growth alike. I don't judge people anymore based on ignorant prejudices. Instead, I fight for them. I speak out on them. I march for them. I live my life with an open mind and an open heart, unless you're a bad driver. I'm working on it. If you ever find yourself judging someone you know nothing about, get to know them. Having been born in a different country, belonging to a certain race, having different preferences, growing up to be someone different does not mean they're deserving of judgment. If you don't know, become informed. I also grew up absolutely loving, I also grew to absolutely love tattoos and piercing. While I wouldn't tattoo my face or wear piercings in multiple places, people who do not scare or worry me. Maybe that's changed because I've had a few. I just wear these two on my face now, and I have a lot of here. And I probably got a lot more tattoos also. So let's see. The number of tattoos or piercings someone has along with their placement does not affect my life and are of no concern to me. If it does not hurt me or anyone else, good for them. Just because we don't understand it doesn't make it wrong. Just because we don't understand it doesn't make it wrong. Next time you're upset because someone doesn't speak your language or is kissing someone you don't understand why they're kissing, try to get to know them instead. Try to put yourself in their shoes. No one is gay just because it gets them attention. I know some people, and I know some people can be flamboyant to get attention, but straight people can also be flamboyant or disruptive or whatever to get attention. It's not just gay people. So, just putting that out there too. So, um, so no one decides to transition on a whim. No one feels like their body isn't theirs just for attention. You can ask anyone who is something you don't understand, and most of them, they'll tell you they wish they were normal so they didn't have to fight for what they have. Just be kind. And for those who rely on biblical verses and might rely on judge not that you be judged, for what the judgment ye judge shall be judged, and what that measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. Matthew 7, 1 to 2, King James Version. If this speaks to you, I recommend you dive deeper into using my workbook available on my website, Understand Christianity and the Bible, a workbook. Another prejudice I once had when I was late. Another prejudice I had when I was younger relates to sex. As discussed in a previous chapter, relationships and sexual interactions for me have always been a little different, which I attribute to sexual trauma as a child. I once heard an analogy that every sexual encounter leaves a string attaching and connection. I once heard an analogy that every sexual encounter leaves a string attaching and connecting us to that person, that there's some reason for the encounter. I think this does have merit. My thought on the analogy was that everyone we encounter is not without meaning, but it doesn't always necessarily change your life. This isn't always the case, and I have specific feelings about specific interactions. I've had relationships with people I would never talk to again. I've had sexual interactions with people I'm still friends with to this day, but will never have a sexual relationship with again. And I'm no longer attracted to them in this way and have a healthy relationship with my now husband that consists of mature and pure commitment, kind of as opposed to my way of thinking about sexual interactions in the past as a teenager or a young adult. My younger self did not always connect sex with love and emotion. Emotion was weakness, and if you cared about people, they would stab you in the back or leave. This was me most of my life. As a grown adult, this is no longer my view, but will always be a part of who I was and who I am. I don't think that it's completely untrue. I think that we should always be aware of how much we give of ourselves to people. But I don't believe that everyone you meet has some kind of ill intent. Um, Thinking this way can hold you back from so many important non-sexual relationships, so many emotional experiences, and so many promising futures. In all the ways I grew as a person from being ignorant, this may be the most significant. I'm still not a person who gets close to everyone, but I'm a person who has a lot of acquaintances, friends, friendly encounters, and loving relationships. I learned that I'm in control of my relationships and my boundaries, and I know I can leave a friendship or relationship if I'm uncomfortable. I know that I'm capable of forming bonds within the boundaries I want to form, and this gives me confidence in my relationships. Relationships are work. Yes, non-sexual relationships are work too, but they're so worth it. I've also heard that our relationships with our fathers reflected into our sexual relationships. I spent most of my life thinking this was a lie. This relates not to having a father around to teach you what you should look for in a man or partner, having a crappy father around to teach you what you should not tolerate from a partner, or losing your father before you're old enough to understand anything about men or partners. I only told my father about one traumatic incident in my life, and he blamed it on my mother. Luckily, when I told him and he ranted about Luckily, when I told him and he ranted about how he blamed it on her and was going to tell her how he felt about it, he was drunk. But I don't think he said anything to her. Now you know, Mom. As it turns out, the reflection of our paternal relationship and our sexual relationship is true for a lot of people. Unless you have the right influence from someone who has been through it, which is almost impossible because no one has the same life history or upbringing, it is hard or impossible to successfully counter the effects of a lacking paternal relationship. This could go for maternal too. For a long time, my views of sexual relationships consisted of 2 points. People are going to take what they want, so you might as well give it to them. And that I needed intimate attention in a way that I controlled. I was sexually assaulted more than once to the point where I just said fuck it and gave it away since it was going to be taken whenever somebody wanted it anyway. I try to control situations by being the one who is explicit, promiscuous, and pretending like I didn't care about anyone since they were just going to hurt me anyway. Again, this is back teenage years and early 20s. This is a mindset that has changed over the years of growth, maturity, positive life experiences, and education. On one hand, sexual trauma gives you the idea that once we get into a situation where another person wants sex, they're going to get it whether I give it to them or not. On the other hand, it gives you the incessant need to control your sexual situations. Sometimes this leads to continuously putting yourself in different situations where you are in control of what happens. And then when you are there to revert your personal reality that says, well, now I have to give it to them because it will just be easier that way and maybe enjoyable. You become a shell in all vulnerable situations. You become a shell in all vulnerable situations where you try to stand up for a split second, but quickly back down to avoid the fight in the slightest way. Personally, this was my thought process. These situations can relate to sex specifically, or they can be drinking to avoid being more willing to put up a fight in an uncomfortable situation. If I'm drunk, I'll just let it happen and not worry about it, trying to stop it. Whether it be anything from attention to self-doubt to rape. It is almost as if you go out of your way to put yourself in compromising sexual situations to see if you can control them. I think that if I didn't have this mindset, there would be a lot of choices I would have made differently. Then again, I would not have the experience I have to write this book and potentially help other people. I've heard other people talk about flashbacks, which I understood differently to the reality of flashbacks. In my mind, flashbacks were just thoughts about a past event and were triggered by a stressful event related to the event. I did not know that paralyzing faint feeling that incorporated knowing you were visualizing something from the past in the moment, but having no idea what you were visualizing from the past after the fact, although you fully knew what was in the moment was a flashback. I did not realize that a flashback brought with it a burning feeling all over my body and feeling paralyzed and thoughts that I would pass out from anxiety. So at some point I started having these flashbacks of assaults that I get real faint, real lightheaded. My body would feel like it was on fire. Sometimes I did pass out. So that's what this is about. Sometimes flashbacks happen so often I know exactly the moment's about to happen. Sometimes hearing a certain song triggers it or a certain word. I realize what is happening as it happens, but I can never remember why that particular song or word would trigger it. I have tried to pay attention so I can document it when it happens, but I'm never able to do so. I've not found anything specific that I can remember after it happens to trigger it, like a specific word maybe I heard more than once. I now know that 4 out of 5 times it happened a lot when I go to Walmart. It could be anxiety from an amount of potential COVID germs in the air for the ridiculous amount of people who are always there. So many people at Walmart. During COVID, there was always so many people. It was there was always so many people. It was, I don't know. But at some point in 2020, I started having these severely intense, what I thought were flashbacks. But then I started taking anxiety medication and realized that they were panic attacks. Um, I even tried having someone else go into Walmart for me once and had an episode as I let them get out of the car to go in without me. It's crazy because to my recollection, nothing's ever happened to me in Walmart. I know I'm not the only person who experiences this, but doctors at the time had been unable to diagnose the problem. They didn't know what was happening. First, we thought maybe seizures, and then I tried anxiety medicine and they stopped happening. So I guess they were panic attacks, come to find out. I once had a flashback that lasted nearly 4 hours. Now, this one actually was a flashback. I had no recollection of time from what my mom told me. It was so intense that the police were called and it was suggested I go to the mental health urgent care office. By the time I arrived, I could not remember anything but a car driving past, which must be what I was watching over and over, based on my eye and head movements during the episode, according to those who were watching. I was told that I was in a catatonic state, that I just stared like I was watching a car drive by. That's the only thing I remember, a car. No color, no make, no model. Yet I feel like I know why I was watching the car. While I did not see the car from that porch beforehand, there was an event that involved two cousins I knew who offered me a ride to school in their car when I was in high school. They offered me a ride to school in their car. Two cousins, I knew them. I dated one of them, I guess you can call it that. But I knew both of them. Instead, they took me back to a house and took turns raping me while the other one held me. Afterwards, they dropped me off back near my mom's house where I proceeded to walk to school. So I was dropped off Freedom Drive, walked to West Meck, but ended up calling my mom, asking her to pick me up and tell her that I just missed the bus because I didn't want to upset her. So she didn't even know that happened until 2000 when I had this flashback. 2000, I don't know. We'll say early 2000s when I had this flashback. So, yeah. Um, this flashback was triggered by an event that made me feel like I was in danger. It ended up with me leaving the house with no recollection of doing so and then having a flashback lasting hours. Other small flashbacks happened when I was alone with my children, with my mom or my, at the time, fiance, now husband. During the event lasting hours, I was drinking. I can only imagine that alcohol made it worse. I had not experienced a flashback of this intensity since then. For anyone who may be reading this and experiences these or other issues due to your trauma, you're not alone. You deserve answers. Trauma is real, but so is recovery. And that is the end of Disruptive Behaviors. So I hope that you were able to follow along, and I hope that you enjoyed that chapter. That chapter is really intense. So, yeah. That's that. And that is honestly, that might be the most intense chapter in the book. Let me look and see. It's not actually. This whole freaking book is intense. But I've had family members read it. I've actually had some family members read the transcripts. I've had people read the book, and everyone that's read it was like, this was intense, but it was really interesting. It was really well written. I will be putting out a second edition, a revision to this book because there's just some things I parted ways with the editor over some differences, but there's some things that I think could be better worded and edited. So I am going to be releasing a revision, but very limited copies of this first and original version are available on my website. They're very limited. I think I have like 20, maybe. So go get the book, read along with me, read the first 2 chapters, catch up, falolity.net/books, and I will see you back here for chapter 4. Check us out on YouTube at Reah Higgs, ReahHagues. You can also keep up with us on Instagram at Just the Who Podcast.